The top floor of Blackwood Innovations was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a painting of conquered territory. Steel and glass reflected clouds and ambition in equal measure. The conference table could seat 20, though most meetings now consisted of Ethan and whoever had been assigned to deliver bad news that week. Thank you for sticking around our channel, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Today, it was his CFO, Marcus Chen, standing uncomfortably near the door with a tablet he kept glancing at like it might burst into flames. The quarterly projections, Marcus began, then stopped. Started again. We're down another 18%. The Vanguard merger is stalling because they're citing, he hesitated. Citing what? Ethan asked flatly. Leadership instability. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Ethan didn't react. He'd stopped reacting months ago. Anger required energy, and he had none left. Anything else? The board wants another meeting. Third one this month. Tell them I'm busy. Ethan. Tell them I'm busy, Marcus. Marcus nodded slowly, recognizing the dismissal. When the door clicked shut behind him, Ethan was alone again. The way he preferred it. The way he'd engineered it. He pulled up his phone, thumb hovering over the voicemail icon. 18 months, and he still couldn't delete it. Couldn't listen to it either. It just existed there. A digital ghost he carried everywhere. Hey, it's me. Running late, but I'll be home soon. Tell Liam his science project looks amazing, and tell Grace I found those sparkle shoes she wanted. Love you. Can't wait to see you. She'd been 6 minutes from home when the car went off the bridge. 6 minutes. Ethan closed his eyes and let the familiar wave of numbness wash over him. It was easier than feeling, safer than remembering. Outside his window, the city blazed with evening lights. Millions of people living their lives, completely unaware that his was ending, one boardroom at a time. The Blackwood mansion sat on 3 acres of manicured perfection, 20 minutes outside the city. It had 12 bedrooms, a pool no one used, and rooms Ethan hadn't entered since the funeral. His children lived there, technically. Liam, 8 years old, quiet and watchful in the way children become when they're trying to figure out what they did wrong. Grace, 5, who'd stopped asking when Mommy was coming home, but still set an extra place at the table when the nannies weren't looking. They had everything. Toys, tutors, activities scheduled down to the 15-minute increment. What they didn't have was a father who could look at them without drowning. Ethan came home late most nights, long after they were asleep, left early before they woke. The nannies handled breakfast, homework, bedtime. He signed permission slips his assistant left on his desk and transferred money for whatever they needed. It was functional, clinical, safe. It was killing all 3 of them, but Ethan didn't know how to stop. Monday evening, the rain came down in sheets that turned the driveway into a river. Ethan sat in his study reviewing contracts he couldn't focus on, listening to thunder rattle the windows. Mrs. Chen knocked softly. Mr. Blackwood, the new nanny is here. Already? He glanced at his watch. 7 o'clock. The interview wasn't until 8. She's early and quite wet. Ethan sighed, closing his laptop. Another agency worker who'd last 2 weeks before the silence of the house drove them away. They always had the same look when they left, relief mixed with pity. He descended the staircase, each step echoing through the cavernous entryway, and stopped. The woman standing in his foyer looked like she'd been caught in a hurricane. Dark hair plastered to her face, simple coat dripping steadily onto marble that cost more per square foot than most people's rent. She held a worn leather portfolio against her chest, and when she looked up at him, her eyes gray, clear, unflinching, met his without the usual deference he'd come to expect. You're early, Ethan said coldly. The bus schedule said I'd be late, she replied. I'd rather be early and wet than late and dry. You're also creating a puddle on a floor that costs more than most cars. Then maybe you should have installed better drainage. She shifted the portfolio. I'm Isabella Brooks. I'm here for the nanny position. The audacity of her response almost made him laugh. Almost. Mrs. Chen, get her a towel. You have 15 minutes. Isabella sat across from him in his study, hair still damp, posture straight despite the obvious discomfort of wet clothes clinging to her skin. She reviewed the job description he'd provided with the kind of focus he recognized: professional, analytical, looking for the details most people missed. "Your children are 8 and 5, she said, Liam and Grace. 7 nannies in 12 months. The agency sends replacements as needed." "That's not why they're leaving." Isabella set down the paper. "They're leaving because this isn't a home, it's a museum." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You've been here 5 minutes. You don't know anything about my home." "I know what grief looks like when it's calcified into routine." Her voice was gentle but firm. "I know what children look like when they're afraid to make noise, because silence is easier than sadness. And I know what a father looks like when he's convinced loving his children will hurt too much." The words sliced through his defenses like a blade. "We're done here," Ethan said, standing abruptly. Isabella stood too, but she didn't move toward the door. "Your children don't need a nanny, Mr. Blackwood. They need their father. But since you've decided you can't be that person right now, they need someone who won't treat them like responsibilities to be managed." "You have no right." "You're right, I don't." She met his glare steadily. "But I'm asking for the chance to prove that what's broken here can be fixed. Not by me, by you. I'm just here to remind everyone, including you, that this house used to have laughter in it." Ethan stood frozen, caught between fury and something more dangerous: recognition. This stranger had walked into his home and articulated the one truth he'd been running from for 18 months. He was failing his children, and he knew it. And knowing it made everything worse. "The children are in the East Wing," he heard himself say. "Mrs. Chen will show you their rooms. You start tomorrow. 7A. Isabella's expression softened fractionally. "I'll be here." She walked to the door, then paused. "Mr. Blackwood, your wife, she wouldn't want this. The silence, the distance, the way you're punishing yourself." "You didn't know my wife." "No, but I know what it's like to survive something that should have killed you. And I know that surviving isn't the same as living." Then she left, leaving Ethan standing in his study with the uncomfortable realization that for the first time since the accident, someone had looked at him and seen more than the grief. They'd seen the man underneath. And somehow, that was more terrifying than anything else. That night, Ethan did something he hadn't done in months. He walked to the East Wing, stood outside Liam's door, listening to the faint rustle of pages his son reading by flashlight under the covers, the way Ethan used to do as a child. Stood outside Grace's door, watching the soft glow of her nightlight cast shadows of stars across the ceiling. He didn't go in. Couldn't. Not yet. But he stood there for 20 minutes, hand on each doorknob, remembering when he used to tuck them in. When Grace would demand 3 stories, and Liam would ask impossible questions about space and time and whether Mommy was watching from heaven. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another email from Daniel Hayes, his COO, suggesting again that Ethan take a leave of absence, for his health, for the company, for everyone's benefit. Ethan silenced it. Downstairs, through the windows, he could see the lights of his company's headquarters glowing against the night sky. Blackwood Innovations, his legacy, his empire. It was supposed to matter. But standing outside his children's rooms, listening to them breathe, Ethan wondered when he'd stop knowing what mattered at all. Tomorrow, Isabella Brooks would walk back through his door and try to resurrect something he'd let die. He didn't believe she could do it. But he also didn't have the energy to stop her from trying. And maybe, somewhere beneath the numbness and the grief and the carefully constructed walls, a small part of him hoped she'd prove him wrong. Isabella arrived at 6:58 a.m., just as she'd promised. Mrs. Chen led her up the curved staircase to the East Wing, where the children's rooms sat in careful isolation from the rest of the house. The hallway was immaculate, expensive art on the walls, plush carpet underfoot, not a single scuff mark or sign that children actually lived here. It felt more like a hotel than a home. "They're usually awake by now," Mrs. Chen said quietly, stopping outside Liam's door. "But they're very quiet. Don't expect much conversation." Isabella nodded, watching as Mrs. Chen knocked softly and opened the door. Liam sat at a desk by the window, already dressed in pressed khakis and a polo shirt that looked uncomfortably formal for an 8-year-old. His dark hair was combed neatly, his posture rigid. He glanced up at Isabella with eyes that were far too guarded for a child. "Liam, this is Miss Brooks," Mrs. Chen said. "She'll be taking care of you and your sister." "Hello, Liam," Isabella said gently. He studied her for a moment, then returned to the book he'd been reading. Hello. No smile, no curiosity, just polite acknowledgement like he'd been trained to greet business associates. Isabella's chest tightened. Grace was even quieter. She sat on the edge of her bed, perfectly made, toys arranged with military precision on the shelves, wearing a white dress that looked like it belonged in a portrait, not a playroom. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a braid so tight it had to hurt. When Isabella entered, Grace looked up with wide eyes that immediately filled with wariness. Hi, Grace, Isabella said, crouching down to the little girl's level. I'm Isabella. I'm going to spend some time with you and your brother. Is that okay? Grace nodded once, but didn't speak. Do you like your room? Isabella asked. Another nod. Do you ever play in here? Grace's eyes darted to the toys on the shelf, then back to Isabella. We're not supposed to make a mess. The words were delivered in a whisper, like a confession. Isabella felt something crack inside her chest. These children weren't living, they were existing. Moving through a house that demanded perfection and silence because their father couldn't handle anything else. Well, Isabella said softly, I think maybe we can change that rule. Just a little bit. Grace's eyes widened, but she didn't smile, like she'd forgotten how. An hour later, Isabella had both children in the playroom, a spacious area on the second floor filled with expensive toys that looked barely touched. She'd spread plastic sheets across the floor and set out paints, brushes, and blank canvases. Liam stood at the edge of the plastic, staring at the supplies like they might explode. We're not allowed to paint in here. Why not? Isabella asked, squeezing bright red paint onto a palette. It's too messy. Dad doesn't like noise or mess. Your dad isn't here right now, Isabella said gently. And sometimes being messy is exactly what we need. Grace stepped closer, drawn by the colors despite her fear. What if we get in trouble? Then I'll get in trouble with you, Isabella promised. But Grace, sometimes the best things in life are a little messy. She dipped her fingers directly into the yellow paint and pressed her handprint onto a canvas. The children gasped. You didn't use a brush, Liam said, horrified and fascinated in equal measure. Nope, your turn. It took 20 minutes of coaxing, but eventually, Liam dipped one careful finger into blue paint, then another, then his whole hand. Grace followed, giggling nervously as purple paint squished between her fingers. And then something shifted. Liam smeared paint across the canvas in broad strokes. Grace added handprints that overlapped into flowers. They started laughing tentative at first, then louder. Real laughter that echoed off the walls. Isabella stepped back, watching them discover joy they'd forgotten existed. They painted their hands, then their arms. Grace accidentally got paint on Liam's nose, and instead of crying, he retaliated with a green streak across her cheek. They were children again. Finally. Ethan had been in his study, reviewing financial reports when he heard it. Laughter. Actual, genuine laughter coming from somewhere in the house. He stood frozen, pen hovering over documents, trying to remember the last time he'd heard that sound. Months, maybe longer. He walked toward it without meaning to, drawn by something he couldn't name. The door to the playroom was cracked open, and through it, he saw them. His children, covered in paint, grinning. Grace's braid had come loose. Liam's perfect outfit was ruined, and neither of them seemed to care. Isabella stood nearby, her own hands covered in colors, smiling as she watched them create chaos. For just a moment, Ethan saw what he'd lost. Not his wife, though her absence ached like a physical wound. But this, the sound of his children being happy, the sight of them unafraid. He'd taken that from them. Not the accident, him. The realization hit like a fist to the chest. Before anyone could see him, Ethan turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. Behind him, the laughter continued. That evening, Isabella found him in the kitchen after the children were in bed. They're good kids, she said quietly. They just needed permission to be kids. Ethan didn't look at her. The playroom is a disaster. It's paint. It'll clean. She paused. They talked about you at dinner, Grace asked, when you'd come see their paintings. I'm busy. You don't have to be present emotionally, Mr. Blackwood. Isabella's voice was gentle but firm. Not yet, but you could at least be present physically. Just show up, even if all you do is stand in the doorway. You don't understand. I understand that every day you hide from them, they think it's their fault you're gone. She met his eyes. And one day, they'll stop asking for you. Is that what you want? Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell her to mind her own business, to remind her she was staff, not family. But he couldn't, because she was right. Their paintings are on the kitchen counter, Isabella said, in case you want to see them. Then she left him alone, with two canvases covered in handprints and chaos. And for the first time in 18 months, Ethan looked at something his children had made and felt something other than emptiness. He felt regret. And maybe, buried beneath it, the faintest spark of hope. By the end of the first week, Isabella had broken nearly every household rule Ethan had established. No sugar after 6 p.m. She made hot chocolate with marshmallows at 7:30 while they read stories. No toys outside the playroom? Liam's building blocks now covered the living room floor in an elaborate castle that took 3 days to construct. No music in the house? Isabella played old jazz records in the kitchen while they ate breakfast, teaching Grace to snap her fingers to the beat. Mrs. Chen watched these transgressions with equal parts horror and fascination, waiting for Mr. Blackwood to notice and put a stop to it. But Ethan was never home when it happened. He left before dawn and returned after the children were asleep, maintaining the careful distance that kept him functional. Until Saturday morning. Isabella had declared it Pancake Day. She'd gathered both children in the kitchen, the massive restaurant-grade kitchen that usually only Mrs. Chen occupied, and lined up ingredients on the marble countertops. We're going to make pancakes from scratch, she announced. And they're going to be terrible. Liam looked confused. Why would we try to make them terrible? Because the best memories come from things that don't go according to plan, Isabella said, tying an apron around Grace's waist. Besides, your mom used to make pancakes, didn't she? Both children went still. They rarely talked about their mother, not because they didn't want to, but because it made their father disappear even further into himself. She did, Liam said quietly. She made them shaped like animals. Then we're making animal pancakes, Isabella declared. And we're making a mess. Are you ready? Grace nodded, a small smile flickering across her face. Within 15 minutes, the kitchen looked like a flour bomb had detonated. Grace had knocked over the bag while trying to measure, sending white powder billowing across the counter. Liam had accidentally cracked an egg too hard, getting shell fragments in the bowl. Isabella had attempted to flip a pancake and launched it onto the ceiling, where it stuck for 3 full seconds before dropping onto the floor. They were all laughing, real, uncontrolled laughter that echoed off the walls and filled the empty spaces of the house. Grace had flour in her hair and chocolate chips on her cheeks. Liam was trying to shape batter into what might have been a giraffe but looked more like a blob with a long neck. Isabella was covered head to toe in ingredients, conducting their chaos like a symphony. Flip it! Flip it! Grace shouted as Liam tried to turn his creation. The spatula slipped. The pancake flopped. More flour went flying. None of them heard the front door open. Ethan had come home to retrieve files he'd forgotten. He'd expected silence, stillness, the usual museum-like quality of his house. Instead, he heard shouting, laughter, music playing from the kitchen. He walked toward it with mounting fury. This was his home, his rules, his carefully maintained order that kept everything from falling apart. He rounded the corner into the kitchen and stopped dead. The room was destroyed. Flour covered every surface. Pancake batter dripped from the counter. His children, his normally pristine, perfectly behaved children, looked like they'd been caught in a food fight, and they were smiling. Grace saw him first. Her smile faltered, fear flickering across her face like she'd been caught doing something wrong. But then she held up a misshapen pancake. "Daddy, look! It's an elephant, sort of." Ethan opened his mouth to speak, to demand an explanation, to restore order, to shut down whatever chaos had invaded his controlled environment. But the words died in his throat. Because Grace was smiling. Really, truly smiling. The kind of smile that reached her eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. The kind of smile he hadn't seen since the funeral. The kind of smile that looked exactly like her mother's. Isabella stood near the stove, apron covered in batter, meeting his gaze without apology. "Mr. Blackwood, we're making pancakes." "I can see that." His voice came out rougher than intended. "We made a mess," Liam added quickly, the smile fading from his face. "We're sorry. We'll clean it up." "You're playing music," Ethan said, still unable to process the scene before him. The children said their mother used to play music while she cooked. Isabella's tone was calm, measured. I thought it might be nice to remember her in a way that doesn't hurt. Ethan felt something crack inside his chest. The same hairline fracture Isabella had created the day she arrived, now spreading wider. This kitchen is, he gestured vaguely at the destruction. Full of life? Isabella supplied. She moved to turn down the music, her eyes never leaving his. If laughter bothers you, Mr. Blackwood, I can leave. I can clean this up, put everything back exactly as it was, and make sure it never happens again. The challenge hung between them. Ethan looked at his children, flower-covered, messy, uncertain, waiting for him to shut down the first real joy they'd experienced in over a year. Grace clutched her elephant pancake like it might disappear. Liam's shoulders had hunched in that familiar defensive posture, preparing for disappointment. And Ethan realized he could end this, could restore the silence and the order and the carefully maintained grief that kept everything manageable. Or he could let them have this. The ceiling, he said finally, pointing upward where a pancake still clung stubbornly to the plaster. There's a pancake on my ceiling. Isabella followed his gaze. That was an accident. Obviously. He looked at Grace, at her hopeful, terrified expression. Did you make one for me? Grace's eyes went wide. You want a pancake? If you're making them anyway. The smile that broke across her face was like sunrise after a long night. I'll make you the best elephant ever. She turned back to the griddle, chattering excitedly to Liam about shapes and chocolate chips and whether elephants should have sprinkles. Isabella watched Ethan carefully, something like understanding in her expression. Thank you, she said quietly. Ethan didn't respond. He just stood there, listening to his children laugh, watching them create chaos in his pristine kitchen. And for the first time since the accident, he didn't feel the overwhelming need to run away. He felt something worse. He felt like he might want to stay. Ethan discovered Isabella's secret by accident. He'd been looking for Grace's allergy medication in the kitchen when he found a book tucked between cookbooks on the shelf, Advanced Child Development and Trauma Response, worn and heavily annotated in the margins. He flipped to the inside cover, a university bookstore sticker, and written in neat handwriting, Isabella Brooks, Psychology Department, Dean's List. Ethan stood there, book in hand, as pieces clicked into place. The way she'd assessed his children within minutes of meeting them. The deliberate strategies she used, structured play, emotional validation, gradual exposure to joy. This wasn't instinct. This was training. When Isabella returned from walking the children to the garden, she found him waiting in the kitchen, a book on the counter between them. You studied child psychology, he said, not a question. Isabella's expression didn't change. I did. Top of your class, according to this. I was. So why are you working as a nanny instead of practicing? Ethan leaned against the counter. What happened? For the first time since she'd arrived, Isabella looked uncomfortable. Life happened, Mr. Blackwood. Not everything has a neat explanation. Try me. She met his eyes, and he saw something there. Pain, maybe, or regret. I dropped out in my final year. Personal reasons. And before you ask, no, I don't want to discuss it. Her voice was firm. What matters is I'm qualified to help your children. The rest is none of your business. Ethan wanted to push, wanted to demand answers from this woman who'd walked into his life and upended everything while keeping her own secrets locked away. But he recognized the walls. He'd built the same ones himself. Fair enough, he said quietly. Isabella nodded, relief flickering across her face. She picked up the book and tucked it into her bag. The children are asking if you'll join them for lunch. You don't have to, but I'll be there, Ethan heard himself say. That evening, after the children were in bed, Isabella sat in the staff kitchen with a cup of tea and her laptop, scrolling through news articles about Blackwood innovations. She told herself she was just curious, just trying to understand the world the children were growing up in. But the numbers didn't add up. Blackwood Innovations reports unexpected Q3 losses. Vanguard merger stalls amid leadership concerns. Investors question CEO's capacity following personal tragedy. Isabella clicked through financial reports, her psychology background making way for something else: pattern recognition. The losses were too consistent, the timing too convenient. And the language in the articles felt coordinated, like someone was orchestrating a narrative. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maria, another nanny she'd met at the children's school pickup. Maria, girl, be careful with that family. Word is the company's going under. Blackwood's losing it. Mental breakdown territory. Isabella stared at the message, unease settling in her stomach. She'd seen Ethan's grief, his distance, his struggle to connect with his children. But she hadn't seen instability. She'd seen a man barely holding himself together but holding nonetheless. Something didn't fit. She found the truth 3 nights later, purely by chance. Isabella had stayed late, helping Liam with a school project. Around 11, she heard a sound from Ethan's study, a crash, followed by harsh breathing. She should have left, should have respected his privacy. Instead, she walked to the half-open door and looked inside. Ethan sat on the floor, back against his desk, surrounded by scattered papers. His hands were shaking. His breathing came in short, desperate gasps, the unmistakable signs of a panic attack. On his laptop screen, frozen, was a photo. A woman with blonde hair and Grace's smile. His wife. Isabella understood immediately. He'd been working late, found the photo, and the memory had ambushed him. She could hear Mrs. Chen's voice in her head. Leave him be. Mr. Blackwood doesn't like to be seen like this. Instead, Isabella stepped inside, closed the door quietly behind her, and sat down on the floor about 6 feet away from him. She didn't speak, didn't try to comfort him or fix it. She just sat there, present and solid, while he fought to breathe. Ethan's eyes found hers, wild and ashamed. Get out. She stayed. I said. I heard you. Her voice was calm. I'm not leaving. I don't need. He couldn't finish. Another wave hit him, his chest heaving. Isabella pulled her knees up, resting her arms across them, and waited. No pity in her expression, no fear, just quiet presence. Minutes passed. Slowly, painfully, Ethan's breathing began to even out. The shaking subsided. The wildness in his eyes faded into exhaustion. When he could finally speak, his voice was raw. You should have left. Probably. I don't need a babysitter. Good, because I'm terrible at babysitting adults. She tilted her head slightly. How long have you been having these? Since the accident. He laughed bitterly. Sometimes I can't breathe, can't think. Everything just, he gestured vaguely at the scattered papers, collapses. That's trauma, Isabella said matter-of-factly. Your body remembering what your mind tries to forget. You sound like a therapist. I almost was one, she paused, before I dropped out. They sat in silence for a long moment, 2 people carrying secrets they weren't ready to share. Finally, Ethan spoke. Thank you, for not. He trailed off. Pitying you? Isabella supplied. You don't need pity, Mr. Blackwood. You need someone who understands that falling apart doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. She stood, brushing off her jeans. Get some sleep. Your children need you functional tomorrow. Isabella? She paused at the door. Why did you really drop out? She looked back at him, and for just a moment, he saw past her armor to the pain underneath. Because sometimes, Mr. Floor Blackwood, knowing how to fix everyone else doesn't mean you can fix yourself. Then she was gone, leaving Ethan alone with his scattered papers and the uncomfortable realization that the woman he'd hired to care for his children was carrying wounds as deep as his own. The cracks in Blackwood Innovations widened into chasms over the next 2 weeks. First, it was the Vanguard merger, 18 months of negotiation, collapsing overnight when their legal team cited unforeseen complications with Blackwood's financial disclosures. Ethan had reviewed those disclosures personally. There were no complications. Then the Patterson contract, worth $40 million, terminated due to a missed deadline that Ethan's team swore they'd met. The emails existed, the submissions were time-stamped. But somehow, nothing had been received. Then came the headlines. Blackwood Innovations faces bankruptcy amid leadership crisis. Sources say CEO Ethan Blackwood, mentally unfit to lead. Board members consider emergency removal of founder. Ethan sat in his office at 2 a.m, staring at article after article, each one painting him as a man unraveling, unstable, dangerous to his own company. His phone buzzed. Daniel Hayes, his COO of 15 years. Daniel, we need to talk. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., my office. Daniel looked concerned when Ethan arrived, the perfect blend of worry and professionalism that had made him invaluable for over a decade. "Sit down, Ethan." Daniel gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I'm going to be direct because I respect you too much to sugarcoat this." Ethan sat, exhaustion weighing on every muscle. "The board is losing confidence," Daniel continued. "These financial irregularities, the failed contracts, the negative press, it's creating a narrative we can't control. And, with a personal situation," he paused delicately, "they're questioning whether you should remain as CEO." "My personal situation," Ethan repeated flatly. "You lost your wife. You have young children who need you. No one blames you for being distracted." Daniel leaned forward, voice dropping. "But Ethan, the company needs stability right now. Maybe it's time to consider stepping back, temporarily, for your own sake, for the children's sake." The words were gentle, reasonable, everything a concerned friend would say, but something about them made Ethan's skin crawl. "I'm not stepping down," he said. "I'm not asking you to resign. Just take a leave of absence. 6 months. Let me handle operations while you focus on your family." Daniel smiled. "You've carried this burden alone long enough. Let someone help you." Ethan stood. "I said no." Daniel's smile didn't falter, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Think about it, for Liam and Grace. They deserve a father who's present, not drowning in a company that's falling apart." That evening, Ethan came home early, a rarity that made Mrs. Chen look up in surprise. He found Isabella in the study, laptop open, papers spread across the coffee table. "What are you doing?" he asked. Isabella jumped slightly, closing a browser tab. "Research. For a project with Grace." But Ethan had seen the screen before she closed it. Financial reports, articles about his company, stock charts. "Why are you reading about Blackwood Innovations?" Isabella hesitated, then sighed. "Because the numbers don't make sense." "What?" She reopened her laptop, pulling up a spreadsheet she'd created. "I started looking into the articles about your company, the timeline of failures, and there's a pattern." She pointed to dates highlighted in yellow. "Every contract collapse, every financial disclosure, error, every negative headline, they all happen within 48 hours of board meetings where Daniel Hayes presents status updates." Ethan stared at the screen. "That's circumstantial." "Maybe. But look at this." She pulled up another document. "These approval overrides in your system, they all trace back to executive-level access. Someone with your authority or Daniel's is changing submissions, delaying approvals, making it look like your team is incompetent." "That's impossible. Daniel's been with me for 15 years. He's suggesting you step down?" Isabella's eyes met his. "I heard you on the phone with him this morning. The walls are thin." Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You think Daniel is sabotaging my company?" "I think someone is, and whoever it is knows exactly how to make it look like you're failing." She closed the laptop. "I could be wrong. But Mr. Blackwood, too many things are going wrong at too convenient times." Ethan sank into a chair, the weight of it crushing. His company, his legacy, everything he'd built, potentially being dismantled by someone he trusted. "I can't lose this," he said quietly. "It's all I have left of—" He stopped, unable to finish. "Of her," Isabella finished gently. "Your wife helped you build this." He nodded, throat tight. "And now, I'm losing it anyway. The company, the board's trust." He looked up at her, and for the first time, let her see the full extent of his despair. "I'm losing my children, Isabella. They're right here in this house, and I'm losing them." Isabella moved to sit across from him, her expression fierce. "No, you're not. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Her voice was steady, unwavering. "You've had everything systematically taken from you. Your wife, your confidence, your company, your relationship with your children. Someone has been working very hard to break you, Mr. Blackwood. But here's what they didn't count on." "What?" "You're not alone anymore." She leaned forward. "You won't lose anything else. Not on my watch. Not your company, not your children, and not yourself. Do you hear me?" Ethan stared at her. This woman who'd walked into his home 3 weeks ago and somehow become the only person willing to fight beside him instead of managing him from a distance. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you care?" Isabella's expression softened. because someone has to, and because those children upstairs deserve a father who wins. For the first time in 18 months, Ethan felt something other than defeat. He felt anger, and anger he could use. Isabella didn't sleep that night. After Ethan went upstairs drained, shaken, but no longer entirely alone, she returned to her laptop and did what she'd been trained to do before. Life derailed her plans. She analyzed patterns. Child psychology had taught her to see what people tried to hide, to read between behaviors and find the truth underneath. Financial sabotage wasn't that different. It was just another form of calculated manipulation. And someone had been manipulating Ethan Blackwood with surgical precision. She started with public records, SEC filings, board meeting minutes, press releases, then moved to what she could access through careful searches: deleted news articles, archived reports, forum discussions about Blackwood innovations. By 3 a.m., she'd created a timeline. By 5 a.m., she'd found the pattern. By dawn, she knew she was right. Mr. Blackwood. Ethan looked up from his coffee. He'd barely slept either to find Isabella standing in the doorway of his study, laptop under her arm, and an expression that was equal parts exhausted and furious. "I need to show you something." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Isabella sat, opened her computer, and turned it toward him. "This is a timeline of every major failure at Blackwood Innovations over the past 18 months, she said. Contracts, mergers, financial disclosures, negative press, everything. Ethan scanned the spreadsheet. Dates, events, outcomes, all color-coded, all devastating. "I know what's happened to my company, Isabella. Look at the first date." He did. His blood went cold. March 14th. Board meeting notes indicate Daniel Hayes assumes temporary operational control due to CEO's personal emergency. March 14th. The day after the accident, the day after his wife died. "It started immediately," Isabella said quietly. "The very first board meeting after you lost her, Daniel took control. And within a week, the first contract began having issues." Ethan's hands clenched on the edge of his desk. He was helping me. I couldn't function. Someone had to." "Keep reading." Ethan scrolled down. Email trails. Isabella had somehow uncovered internal communications that should have been private. Messages between Daniel and board members, carefully worded but damning in their implications. "Ethan's not fit to lead right now. We need to protect the company. Another quarter like this and we'll have grounds for removal. Give it time. He'll step down himself when he realizes he can't handle it." Ethan felt sick. "I found deleted server logs," Isabella continued. "Access records that show someone with executive clearance overriding approvals, changing timestamps, redirecting communications. The digital fingerprints are scrubbed, but the pattern matches Daniel's work schedule. Late nights, weekends when you were with your children or trying to be." She pulled up another document. Bank transfers. Small amounts at first, routed through subsidiary accounts. Nothing that would trigger immediate alerts, but over 18 months? She met his eyes. "Someone's been systematically bleeding your company while making it look like mismanagement." Ethan leaned back in his chair, the pieces falling into a picture he didn't want to see. "Daniel Hayes has been with me for 15 years. Which means he knew exactly how to destroy you." Isabella's voice was hard. "He knew your systems, your weaknesses, your blind spots. And he waited for the perfect moment when you were at your most vulnerable to start taking everything." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would he do this?" Isabella pulled up one final document, a corporate filing from 3 years ago. "This is a proposal Daniel made to the board. He wanted to take Blackwood Innovations public, sell to a tech conglomerate for a massive payout. You refused. You wanted to keep it private, family-owned, something you could pass to your children. I remember. We had a huge fight about it. He never forgave you." Isabella's expression was grim. "And when your wife died, he saw an opportunity. Get you out, take control, sell the company, and walk away with millions." Ethan stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The morning sun was rising over the city, indifferent to the betrayal unfolding in this room. 15 years, he whispered. "I trusted him with everything." "He counted on that." Isabella closed her laptop. "Mr. Blackwood, I know this hurts, but we have evidence now. We can stop him." "How?" "He's covered his tracks. The board already thinks I'm unstable. If I accuse him without ironclad proof, then we get ironclad proof. Isabella stood, and Ethan saw something fierce in her expression. Something protective and dangerous. I spent 2 years studying how people hide their damage. I know how to find what they don't want found. This isn't your fight, Isabella. Yes, it is. Her voice was quiet but absolute. Those children upstairs deserve a father who isn't destroyed by someone else's greed. And you deserve to know the truth about what happened to your life. Ethan turned to face her fully. If Daniel figures out we're investigating him, he won't, because I'm just the nanny. She smiled, but there was steel underneath. No one pays attention to the help. That's going to be his biggest mistake. For a long moment they stood there, CEO and Nanny, two people who'd been broken by different tragedies, now bound by a common enemy. What do you need? Ethan asked finally. Access to your server logs, your financial systems, and time. You'll have it. Isabella nodded. Then let's go hunting, Mr. Blackwood. As she left his office, Ethan looked back at the timeline on her screen. 18 months of calculated destruction, starting the week he buried his wife. Daniel hadn't just betrayed him professionally, he'd weaponized Ethan's grief. And now, thanks to a woman who was supposed to be caring for his children, Ethan finally understood what he was fighting. Not just for his company, for everything Daniel had tried to take. Isabella found Daniel Hayes in his office 3 days later, late enough that most of the executive floor had emptied, but early enough that security wouldn't question her presence. She knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. Daniel looked up from his computer, irritation flashing across his face before settling into condescending politeness. Miss Brooks, can I help you? I need to talk to you about Mr. Blackwood. Daniel leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. If this is about his situation, I'm not sure that's appropriate to discuss with the nanny. It's about the financial irregularities. Isabella closed the door behind her, phone recording in her jacket pocket. The ones that started the week his wife died. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, a flicker of calculation. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Isabella sat down uninvited, meeting his gaze steadily. The server overrides, the delayed approvals, the leaked information to the press. It all traces back to you. Daniel's smile was cold. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? Enough to make the board very interested. The board? He laughed. The board thinks Ethan is mentally unstable. They're voting tomorrow to remove him. Even if you had evidence which you don't, who do you think they'd believe? A billionaire CEO's trusted advisor of 15 years? Or the nanny he hired a month ago? Why did you do it? Isabella asked quietly. 15 years of working together. What made you want to destroy him? Daniel's expression hardened. You want to know why? Because I built this company as much as he did. I was there for every all-nighter, every pitch, every risk. And when it came time to reap the rewards, to go public and cash out like we deserved, his voice turned bitter. Ethan said no. Said he wanted to keep it family-owned. Pass it to his children someday. So you decided to take it from him. I decided to get what I earned. Daniel stood, walking around his desk, and then his wife died, and he fell apart, and suddenly it became easy. All I had to do was give him enough rope to hang himself. You tampered with financial accounts, Isabella said, keeping her voice level. Orchestrated rumors, made it look like he was incompetent. Made it look? Daniel laughed. He is incompetent. He can't even look at his own children without breaking down. The man is a disaster, and I'm doing everyone a favor by removing him before he destroys everything. You hate him. I hate what he represents. Daniel's voice dripped with venom. Born into privilege, handed opportunities, inheriting money and connections I had to claw my way toward, and then having the audacity to refuse to share the spoils. He leaned against his desk. Tomorrow, the board removes him. I take control, and 6 months from now, I sell this company for $3 billion. Ethan gets nothing, and I finally get everything I deserve. That's your plan. That's reality, Miss Brooks. His smile turned menacing. And if you think about sharing this little conversation, remember, I'm untouchable. You're nobody. Try to come after me, and I'll make sure you never work again. I'll make sure Ethan knows you were just another opportunist trying to take advantage of his grief. Isabella stood slowly. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Hayes. Get out of my office. She left without another word, heart pounding, phone still recording in her pocket. The emergency board meeting convened at 9 a.m. the next morning. Ethan sat at the head of the table, jaw tight, as Daniel presented his case: declining revenues, failed contracts, leadership concerns. The narrative had been carefully constructed over 18 months, and now Daniel was delivering the final blow. In conclusion, Daniel said, I recommend we place Mr. Blackwood on indefinite leave and transition operational control to interim management. It's in the company's best interest, and frankly, in Ethan's best interest, to step back before more damage is done. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded. Others avoided Ethan's eyes. I call for a vote, Daniel continued. All in favor. The conference room door opened. Isabella walked in, dressed professionally, laptop bag over her shoulder, meeting Ethan's startled gaze with steady determination. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said calmly, but there's something the board needs to hear before they vote. Daniel's expression went cold. Miss Brooks, this is a private meeting. You need to leave. I will, in a moment. Isabella connected her laptop to the conference room display. Mr. Blackwood, may I? Ethan didn't know what she was doing, but he nodded. Isabella opened an audio file and looked directly at Daniel. Play the file. Daniel's face went pale. The recording began. I built this company as much as he did. When it came time to reap the rewards, to go public and cash out like we deserved, Ethan said no. The board members leaned forward, expressions shifting from confusion to shock. I decided to get what I earned, and then his wife died, and he fell apart, and suddenly it became easy. You tampered with financial accounts, orchestrated rumors, made it look? He is incompetent. The conference room was silent except for Daniel's recorded voice confessing to 18 months of systematic betrayal. When the recording ended, no one moved. Daniel stood frozen, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. That recording is inadmissible. She had no right. I had every right, Isabella said quietly. You threatened me. You confessed to corporate sabotage, and you tried to destroy a man when he was at his weakest. One of the board members, Margaret Chen, the longest-serving member, stood slowly. Call security. Daniel Hayes is to be escorted from the building immediately. You can't do this, Daniel started. You're done? Ethan said, his voice steady for the first time in months. You're done with my company, done with my trust, and done with your career. I'll be filing criminal charges by end of day. Security arrived. Daniel was escorted out, still protesting, still trying to spin the narrative. The door closed behind him. Silence filled the room. Then Margaret turned to Ethan. I think we owe you an apology, Mr. Blackwood. Ethan looked at Isabella, still standing by the laptop, and saw what she'd risked for him. Her credibility, her safety, everything. No, he said quietly. I owe someone else my thanks. The board meeting adjourned in stunned silence. Margaret Chen had promised a full audit. Legal counsel was being contacted. The company's reputation would need careful management, but with Daniel exposed, Blackwood Innovations could finally begin genuine recovery. Ethan shook hands mechanically, accepted condolences and apologies he barely heard, and watched as board members filed out, stealing glances at Isabella like they were trying to solve a puzzle they hadn't known existed. When the room finally emptied, it was just the two of them. Thank you, Ethan said, the words inadequate for what she'd done. I don't know how to. You don't have to. Isabella was packing up her laptop, movements efficient but her hands trembling slightly. The adrenaline was wearing off. I'm just glad it's over. But something in her expression told Ethan it wasn't over. Not quite. What is it? He asked. Isabella hesitated, finger hovering over her laptop case. There's something else. Something I found while I was investigating Daniel's records. Ethan felt cold dread settle in his stomach. What? Not here. She glanced at the glass walls of the conference room, the open floor beyond. Can we go somewhere private? They ended up in Ethan's office, door closed, the city sprawling below them through floor-to-ceiling windows. Isabella set her laptop on his desk and opened a folder marked with a date that made Ethan's chest tighten. March 13th, the night of the accident. I wasn't looking for this, Isabella said quietly. I was tracking financial transfers, trying to build a timeline of Daniel's sabotage. But I found something else buried in his deleted files. She pulled up a document, a police report, about your wife's accident. I know what the report says, Ethan said, his voice rough. She lost control on the bridge. Weather conditions. Late at night, they ruled it an accident. I know, but Isabella pulled up another file. I have a friend, someone I knew in graduate school who went into forensic psychology. She works with the police department sometimes, consulting on cases. She met his eyes. I asked her to look into it, unofficially, just to see if there was anything Daniel might have been involved with that night. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. And? Isabella's expression was pained. Ethan, the accident wasn't random. The words hung in the air like smoke. What are you saying? She pulled up a scanned document, a mechanic's report dated 2 weeks after the accident. This is from the impound yard where your wife's car was taken. Standard procedure is a mechanical inspection. It's usually cursory, just checking for obvious defects that might have contributed to the crash. Ethan stared at the report, the words blurring. Isabella. The brakes had been tampered with, she said gently. The brake lines were deliberately scored, not enough to cause immediate failure, but enough that under stress, like driving in rain on a bridge. She trailed off. Ethan couldn't breathe. The office tilted around him. That's impossible, he whispered. They said it was an accident. They investigated. They investigated a single vehicle crash with no witnesses. The weather was bad, the road was slick. They had no reason to suspect foul play, so they didn't look deeper. Isabella's voice cracked. But Ethan, the report is right here. The mechanic noted it as suspicious wear pattern, but by the time anyone might have followed up, the case was closed. Your wife was buried, you were drowning in grief. And Daniel was systematically taking over your company. Ethan backed away from the desk, from the laptop, from the truth he couldn't process. No, this isn't. There's more. Isabella pulled up email records, her hands shaking now too. The week before the accident, Daniel sent encrypted messages to an auto shop across town. The same shop that serviced your company vehicles. He was asking about mechanical modifications and time-delayed system failures. The room spun. Ethan gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white. The target was you, Isabella said, tears in her eyes. You were supposed to be driving that night. You always drove when you came home late from the office. But that night, you had an emergency conference call that ran long, and your wife, her voice broke. She took your car because hers was in the shop. She wanted to surprise you. Pick you up so you wouldn't have to drive home exhausted. Ethan's legs gave out. He sank to the floor, back against the desk, the truth crushing him like a physical weight. His wife hadn't died in a random accident. She died because someone wanted him dead. She died driving his car, taking his route, because she loved him and wanted to help him. She died in his place. No, he choked out. No. 18 months of grief crashed over him all at once, but now it was mixed with rage and guilt so profound he thought it might kill him. Every night he'd blamed himself for not being there. Every morning he'd woken up wishing it had been him instead, and now he knew it should have been him. Daniel had tried to murder him, and killed the woman Ethan loved instead. I can't. Ethan couldn't finish, couldn't breathe. His chest heaved with sobs he'd been holding back for over a year. She wasn't supposed to. It should have been me. It was supposed to be me. Isabella dropped to her knees beside him, and for a moment, she just let him break. Let him rage and grieve and fall apart in a way he'd never allowed himself to do. Then she reached out and gently took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me, she said firmly, tears streaming down her own cheeks. You didn't fail her. You didn't cause this. Someone tried to destroy you, and your wife paid the price. That's not your fault. Do you hear me? That's not your fault. She died because of me. She died because Daniel Hayes is a monster. Isabella's voice was fierce. She died because someone was willing to commit murder for money and power. But Ethan, you didn't put her in that car. You didn't tamper with those brakes. You didn't choose any of this. I should have protected her. You couldn't have known. Isabella's thumbs wiped at his tears. You couldn't have known what Daniel was planning. No one could have. Ethan shook his head violently. For 18 months, I thought I kept telling myself it was just bad luck, bad timing, an accident, and I could live with that. I could accept that life is random and cruel, and sometimes people die for no reason. His voice cracked. But this, knowing someone deliberately killed her, knowing she died because I refused to sell my company, because I wanted something to pass to my children, that's on Daniel, not you. She'd still be alive if... Stop. Isabella's voice was sharp enough to cut through his spiral. Your wife would not want you to carry this. She would not want you to blame yourself for someone else's evil. You didn't know her. I know she loved you, Isabella interrupted. I know because I see it everywhere in this house. In the photos Liam keeps under his pillow. In the way Grace talks about Mommy's favorite flowers. In the fact that she drove through rain and late-night traffic just to bring you home safe. Her voice softened. That's not the kind of love that would want you destroyed by guilt, Ethan. That's the kind of love that would want you to live, to be happy, to raise your children and protect everything you built together. Ethan looked at her, this woman who'd walked into his life a month ago and systematically dismantled every wall he'd built around his grief. How do I come back from this? The same way you've been coming back from everything else, Isabella said. One day at a time, one moment at a time, and this time, you know the truth. Daniel didn't just steal from your company. He stole your wife, your peace, and 18 months of your life. But he didn't win, Ethan. You're still here. Your children are still here, and you get to choose what happens next. What if I choose wrong? Then you'll choose again tomorrow. She released his face, but took his hands instead. But right now, you need to decide, are you going to let Daniel's betrayal destroy what's left of your life? Or are you going to honor your wife by actually living again? Ethan closed his eyes, the weight of the decision crushing. He thought about his wife's laugh, the way she used to dance in the kitchen while making dinner, the way she'd kiss their children goodnight and then climb into bed beside him, talking about dreams and futures and all the things they'd do together. She died believing he'd be okay, believing their children would be okay. And for 18 months, he'd proven her wrong. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. Yes, you do. Isabella squeezed his hands. You've already started. You ate pancakes with your children. You stood in doorways watching them paint. You let them see you again. Her smile was sad and gentle. Your wife would be proud of that, of you trying. It's not enough. It's a beginning. Isabella helped him stand, both of them unsteady. And tomorrow, you're going to call the police. You're going to give them this evidence. You're going to make sure Daniel doesn't just lose his career, he loses his freedom. And after that? After that, you're going to go home to your children. You're going to hug them. And you're going to start building the life your wife wanted for all of you. One that isn't defined by her death, but by how much she loved you. They stood in his office as the sun set over the city, two people bound by trauma and truth, and the strange intimacy of having seen each other's worst moments. Isabella, Ethan said quietly, why are you doing this? Really? You didn't sign up to investigate corporate sabotage or uncover murder conspiracies. You were supposed to be a nanny. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. Because I know what it's like to have your life destroyed by someone else's choices. I know what it's like to walk away from everything you worked for because the pain was too much. Her voice was barely above a whisper. And I know what it's like to wish someone had been there to tell you it wasn't your fault. What happened to you? Isabella smiled sadly. Another time. Right now, this isn't about my past. It's about your future. Ethan wanted to push. He wanted to know what had broken her badly enough that she'd abandoned a promising career in psychology, but he respected the boundary. She'd given him so much truth, evidence, unwavering support when everyone else had doubted him. He could give her privacy in return. Thank you, he said again, for everything. You already thanked me. It's not enough. Then thank me by not wasting what we've uncovered. Isabella picked up her laptop. Make them pay, Ethan. Your wife deserves justice. Your children deserve to know their father fought for the truth. And you? He asked. What do you deserve? Isabella paused at the door, something complicated crossing her face. I deserve to see those kids grow up happy. That's enough. Then she left, leaving Ethan alone with the truth that would either destroy him completely or finally set him free. He looked at the police report still glowing on his computer screen, at the evidence of deliberate murder disguised as tragedy, and for the first time since the accident, Ethan felt something other than grief. He felt rage. And rage he could use. 3 months after Daniel Hayes was arrested on charges of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder, Blackwood Innovations held its first board meeting under its reclaimed leadership. Ethan sat at the head of the table, no longer the hollow shell of a man who'd been barely holding on. The dark circles under his eyes had faded. His posture was straight, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who'd walked through fire and come out forged stronger. Q. 3 projections show we're not just recovering, we're growing, he announced, pulling up financial charts that told a story of resurrection. We've regained investor confidence, restored 3 major contracts, and brought in 2 new partnerships that position us ahead of where we were before the sabotage. The board members nodded, visibly relieved. Margaret Chen smiled. It's remarkable, Ethan. Truly, you've done the impossible. Not alone. Ethan gestured to the woman sitting 2 seats down from him, taking notes with the same focused intensity she brought to everything. Isabella Brooks has been instrumental in our crisis communication strategy. She's the reason our reputation recovered as quickly as it did. Several board members looked surprised. They'd known Isabella as the nanny, the woman who'd exposed Daniel. But seeing her in strategic meetings, watching her handle press releases and investor relations with remarkable insight, had shifted their perception entirely. Miss Brooks, one board member said carefully, your background is in child psychology, correct? Isabella looked up, unruffled. It is. Which means I understand how people process trauma, rebuild trust, and communicate during crisis. Turns out those skills translate remarkably well to corporate reputation management. She's also, Ethan added, the only person in this building who had the courage to tell me the truth when I needed to hear it. That's worth more than any MBA. The meeting continued, but Ethan caught Isabella's eye across the table. She gave him a small smile, the kind that said, you're doing well and I'm proud of you without words. It had become their language. Small gestures, quiet support, the understanding that came from having survived something terrible together. At home, everything had changed too. Liam no longer flinched when Ethan entered a room. Grace no longer whispered when she laughed. The house that had been a museum of grief had slowly transformed into something that felt like a home again. Mornings were chaotic now. Ethan made pancakes badly, but with enthusiasm, while Liam helped Grace reach the chocolate chips, and Isabella supervised from the kitchen island, coffee in hand, occasionally intervening to prevent actual disasters. Dad, you're burning it again, Liam pointed out. It adds character, Ethan insisted, flipping a pancake that was definitely too dark on one side. Grace giggled. Character means yucky. Character means Dad's trying, Isabella corrected gently, meeting Ethan's eyes with amusement. These mornings, loud, messy, imperfect, were Ethan's favorite part of the day. They were proof that life could be rebuilt, that joy could return, that his children could look at him and see a father instead of a ghost. Bedtimes had become sacred. Ethan read stories every night now, voices and sound effects included. Sometimes Liam would fall asleep mid-chapter, curled against his side. Sometimes Grace would demand just one more until Isabella had to stage an intervention. All right, mini dictator, Isabella would say, gently extracting the book from Grace's clutches. Your father needs sleep too, but the dragon hasn't been defeated yet. The dragon will still be there tomorrow, Ethan promised, kissing her forehead. Dragons are patient like that. After the children were asleep, Ethan and Isabella would often sit in the kitchen, sharing coffee or tea, talking about everything and nothing. She'd become more than the nanny, more than his business advisor. She'd become the person he trusted most in the world, and somewhere along the way, the person he couldn't imagine his life without. But neither of them had said it out loud. It was a warm evening in early June when Ethan found Isabella in the garden. The children were asleep. Mrs. Chen had gone home. The house was quiet in the best way, the peaceful silence of contentment rather than grief. Isabella sat on a bench beneath the old oak tree, surrounded by fireflies that danced like tiny stars. She'd changed out of her business clothes into jeans and a simple shirt, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger like this, less guarded. Mind if I join you? Ethan asked. She looked up, surprised but not unwelcoming. It's your garden. Technically. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. But you've claimed this spot pretty thoroughly over the past few months. It's peaceful here. Isabella watched the fireflies drift past. Sometimes I need to remember what peace feels like. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of silence that only exists between people who've earned the right to it. The board wants to make your position official, Ethan said finally. Vice President of Strategic Communications. Full salary, benefits, the works. Isabella's expression flickered with something he couldn't quite read. That's generous. It's deserved. You've done more for this company in 3 months than some executives do in years. I'm a nanny, Ethan. You're so much more than that. He turned to face her fully. You're the reason my company survived, the reason my children are thriving, the reason I'm he, pause, searching for words, the reason I'm alive again instead of just existing. Isabella looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. You would have gotten there eventually. No. His voice was firm. I wouldn't have. I was drowning, Isabella, sinking deeper every day, and you showed up in the rain and refused to let me go under. Ethan, you didn't just save my company, he continued, the words he'd been holding back for weeks finally breaking free. You saved my family. You gave me back my children. You gave me back myself. Tears glistened in Isabella's eyes. That's not fair. What's not fair? You can't. She stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. You can't say things like that. Ethan stood too, confused. Why not? It's true. Because I'm the nanny, she said, voice breaking. Because you're their father and my employer and this, she gestured between them. Whatever this is, it crosses every line. And your children need stability, not complications. My children love you, Ethan said quietly. They ask me every night if you're staying, if you're going to leave like the others did. Then I'll stay as their nanny. I don't want you as their nanny. The words came out more forcefully than he intended. Ethan took a breath, gentling his tone. Isabella, I want you as more. She shook her head, backing away. You're confused. You're grateful. You've been through trauma, and I helped you, and you're mistaking that for what? He closed the distance between them, but didn't touch her. For feelings I've been trying to ignore for 2 months? For the fact that I look forward to seeing you in the mornings more than anything else? For the way my whole day feels lighter when you smile at me? Ethan, stop. Why? He searched her face. Because you don't feel it too? Because I'm imagining the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention? Because you don't stay up late making sure I eat dinner after the children are asleep? Isabella's tears spilled over. Because I'm terrified, she whispered. Because I walked away from my entire life 3 years ago when it fell apart, and I've been too scared to build anything real since then. And you, her voice cracked. You and those children have become everything to me. If I let myself hope for more and it falls apart, I don't think I'll survive it. Ethan understood that fear intimately. He'd lived in it for 18 months. I'm terrified too, he admitted. Every day, I'm terrified of failing my children again. Terrified of letting Daniel's betrayal make me unable to trust anyone. Terrified that maybe I don't deserve a second chance at happiness after everything I've lost. You do deserve it. So do you. He took her hand gently, feeling her trembling. Isabella, I don't know what your past looks like. I don't know what made you walk away from psychology or why you're so convinced you don't get to have something good. But I know what I see. Someone brave and brilliant and kind who's been running from her own happiness as hard as I was. She looked down at their joined hands. What if we mess this up? Then we'll figure it out, together. He brought her hand to his chest over his heart. I lost everything once. And then you walked into my home during a rainstorm and taught me how to breathe again. You showed me that broken things can be fixed, that it's possible to build something new from the ruins. I didn't save you, Isabella said softly, echoing the words she'd told him months ago in his office. I know. I chose to come back to life, he smiled. But you gave me a reason to make that choice. You and Liam and Grace, you're the reason I wake up wanting to be better. Isabella's resolve was crumbling. He could see it in her eyes, the war between fear and hope. Stay, Ethan said quietly. Not as the nanny, not as an employee. Stay as the woman who changed everything, as the person I want beside me, as, he took a breath, as someone I'm falling in love with. The words hung in the air between them, terrifying and true. Isabella closed her eyes, more tears sliding down her cheeks. When she opened them again, there was something different there. Not fear, Decision. I already chose you, she whispered. Weeks ago, I just didn't know how to say it. Ethan pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her as she finally let herself lean into him. Then say it now. She looked up at him, vulnerable and brave all at once. I choose you, Ethan Blackwood. I choose your messy pancakes and your terrible bedtime voices, and the way you've fought so hard to be the father your children deserve. Her smile was watery, but genuine. And I choose to believe that maybe, possibly, I'm allowed to be happy too. You are, he said firmly. We both are. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long exile, gentle and sure and full of promise. She kissed him back with everything she'd been holding, in all the fear and hope and impossible love that had been growing between them since that first rainy night. When they finally pulled apart, fireflies danced around them like blessings. So, Isabella said, slightly breathless, I guess I should tell the agency I won't be taking any new nanny positions. Ethan laughed, genuine laughter that felt like sunshine. I guess you should. The children are going to have opinions about this. Grace will plan the wedding before breakfast tomorrow. Isabella's eyes widened. Ethan, I'm not proposing, he said quickly. Not yet. But someday? He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Someday soon, I'm going to ask you to be more than just the woman I love. I'm going to ask you to be part of this family officially, if you'll have us. All of you are a lot to handle, Isabella teased, but her eyes were shining. We're worth it, though. Yeah. She kissed him again, soft and sweet. You really are. Inside the house, Liam and Grace watched from the upstairs window, supposedly asleep but far too excited to actually sleep. I told you, Grace whispered triumphantly. I told you Dad loved her. You were right, Liam admitted. Do you think this means she'll stay forever? I think it means we're a family again, Grace said. A different family than before, but still a family. Liam smiled, something peaceful settling in his chest. Mom would like her. Yeah, Grace agreed softly. I think she would. They watched their father and Isabella in the garden, surrounded by fireflies and laughter, and for the first time since their mother died, the house felt complete again. Not the same as before, never the same, but whole, healing, home. 6 months later, Ethan would ask Isabella to marry him in that same garden, with Liam and Grace hiding behind the oak tree, ready to celebrate. She would say yes before he finished the question. Daniel Hayes would be convicted and sentenced to 15 years for corporate fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. Blackwood Innovations would reach record profits under Ethan's renewed leadership. But none of that would matter as much as the small moments. Pancake mornings, bedtime stories, messy hair, and laughter echoing through halls that had been silent for too long. Ethan had lost everything once. But he'd learned that sometimes, when you're brave enough to let someone in, you get the chance to build something even better from the ruins. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a new beginning. And that was more than enough.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Subscribe, like, and click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.